Welcome to the Black Male Impact. Today we have as guest Dr. Jesse Kane. Dr. Kane, welcome to the Black Male Impact.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Man, it's a pleasure having you here with us today. I'm just looking forward to this conversation. But before we get into the conversation itself, Dr. Kane have been in education for over 25 years. That's real commitment to mold the minds of the future. He's also currently the vice president of success and enrollment management at Evers College, and
Medgar Evers.
Medgar Evers.
Right.
And he will be sharing more with us before we get into the conversation today. So thanks again for being here on the Black Male Impact. Man, I'm just ready to get to know what you're doing and what suggestions you have for us that, will empower, especially us as Black men, to make a difference as we go forward. So please share more about yourself so the listeners can know you a little bit better before we get into the conversation.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Cross. And I appreciate being here and giving me the opportunity just to share a bit about myself and kind of my trajectory that has led me to the work that I'm doing today. Before I get started, I want to congratulate you on the work that you've been doing through the Black Male Impact. I think, bringing light to issues that are important to our community is very important. And so you should be commended for your commitment to helping us address some of the systemic issues that we are facing within our community. But about me, as you indicated, right now I am at Medgar Evers College within the City University of New York. It is in Brooklyn, New York. So I get an opportunity to be in the heart of the Crown Heights community, and really focusing on at the institution that I'm in currently is that there is a strong social justice mission of our college. And so we are inextricably connected to the community. So we get an opportunity to not only provide our students with a quality education, but really get them to see how they can make an impact in the communities in which they work, they live, and hopefully that in which they serve. So that's what I'm doing now.
Man, that's awesome. And to get the students involved in the process of the change that will benefit them, I believe it's important. It's not just giving them the knowledge to go out there and work, but to equip them to be able to participate in the process of change. I think that is really good, because the work is still going to be a part of what they do, because as they prepare for their future and prepare also for the next generation. So I think that is great work, not just to impart the knowledge, but as you mentioned, to get the students involved in the process of the change that will benefit them. I think we have to get the young people to be empowered. And I think that's what you're doing, empowering them to participate in their process to make a positive impact. Man, that's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir. So I'm going to get into the questions that I have here. So my first question to you is, what is the mindset that it takes to make a positive impact?
Yeah, I think it's basic mindset ideology, right? Is one, if you think about a problem that exists in your community, it starts with the belief that you can make a difference, right? That whatever the issue is, that we can make an impact on that issue. And so we have to believe that our families, our communities are worth fighting for. And so what I would say the mindset is really about, no matter what the obstacle is, we have to believe and we have to think that we can make an impact on that issue. And so from there, we're able to do some amazing things with that basic belief that we can make a difference.
I believe that is true. And I really like what you said about worth fighting for. We have to believe, of course, or we have to believe that the change that we want to see is worth fighting for, because sometimes it's going to take more effort than the ordinary to create some of the changes that we want to see. And if we don't have that belief that what we're doing is worth doing, then the challenges or oppositions or setbacks sometimes will derail you, or have some people giving up on the thing that they want to see change. So I really appreciate that perspective, not only just to believe that it's possible, but knowing that it is worth fighting for. And that's a perspective that we all need to have when it comes to creating the change that we want to see. Know that what we want is worth it. And once you have that
Absolutely.
belief, you know,
Absolutely. And as you indicated, sometimes it is the long game, not the short game. Is that it
that's it.
takes some commitment. It takes some, we got to roll up our sleeves and we have to stick with it. But that basic belief that what you're fighting for is worth it, even if you don't experience the change or the benefit of your work, that you knowing that you're doing something for someone that may come behind you, that their travel and their road will be that much easier because of the work and the foundation that you're laying today has to be something that keeps you motivated to continue doing the work that you're doing.
Man, and I really like that perspective. And is we have to approach life from that sense, where what we're doing not only benefits us, we are laying the foundation for the next generation. I really appreciate you saying that because that's how we have to start thinking if we haven't been thinking that way. Not the short game, but the long game, knowing that we are preparing the future by the things that we do today. And that leads me to my next question. What advice do you have for the men listening and how they can play a role in creating positive change?
And not to mean to sound cliche and to borrow a slogan from something that we all know, is that we just have to do it, right? We have to get involved. And a lot of times too many individuals with talent stand on the sideline and judge what we see, as opposed to saying, and relative to what the first question was, saying that, you know what, I can get involved in this and I can make a difference in this. And so the advice that I would give is just about creative positive change is just to see and identify something in your community and say, how can I do something to impact this, right? And I think that that's very, very important. And that too oftentimes that there are too many people with too many ideas, and we will Monday quarterback an issue to death, right? But how do we now say that, you know what, enough is enough, and I am going to lend my heart, my talent, my mind, my hands to this issue, right? And I think that that is important, that we always remember that we don't know what tomorrow may bring. We don't know what the outcome may be, but nothing happens if we don't take a step towards ensuring that whatever that issue is, whatever impact that we want to see in our community, that we are a part of that change and not just benefactors of that change.
Man, that is really powerful and a great reminder that we all have talents. And what I really like from what you shared is that we must identify where we want to make the difference and get off the sideline and just do that part. Because sometimes what I've come to understand is that we see the change that needs to happen. And sometimes the change that we see that needs to happen, we're thinking that somebody else supposed to do that change.
Right, right,
But the
right.
person that we're thinking supposed to do it may not see the change that we see. So as you shared, we need to identify what we can do and just do it. And I think if we do that, we will also attract other people who have the same desire to create those change. Maybe they're not courageous enough, maybe they're not confident enough, but because you decide to do it, you will get those people to come on board to support what you see as something that needs to be done to create change or to make progress. So I really appreciate that perspective because, as you mentioned, there are a lot of talented people, but sometimes they may not realize how to contribute or
Right,
where to use
right.
their talent. So that is important. And that's a great reminder to all of us to make sure if we identify something, to do something about it and don't worry about who is not doing something. We must
Correct,
do something.
correct. And you know, in all fairness, some of these issues may appear to many of us to be too big of an issues for me to do anything. And I remember I used to have a coworker, and he had a great saying. He said, the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. So rather than looking at the entirety of it that may seem overwhelming, how can we look at small parts of it? And I can do something in this smaller scale or this smaller goal and begin to work up and get others involved and connect with other people who are like-minded and similarly doing the work that you are doing and create a movement. And we don't have to start with the idea that whatever we do will resolve this issue. And it's this microwave mentality that many people have. I want it right away. I volunteer one weekend and that's enough. That should change everything. But again, what we said before, it's about how do you commit to something, right? And that commitment may be something that you're doing for the moment, but it may be a commitment for a lifetime.
Right.
But to continue to keep doing those things and again, eat that elephant one bite at a time. So break it up in smaller parts, smaller goals, do something that may have more of a local impact, and maybe that can grow to something that can have a larger impact, a national impact, or even a global impact. But it has to start somewhere.
Man, that's a very valid point because looking at the bigger picture can be overwhelming. And if it
Right.
gets overwhelming, you may not take the first step when all we need to do is take the first step. And the next step and the next step will come by taking the first step. So that's a really great point and a great reminder to all of us who want to make a difference. And that leads me to my next question, which kind of ties into a little bit of what you just shared, but I'll ask the question anyway. How can we as Black men help to change the narrative today?
Right. Well, that's an interesting question because when I hear that, I ask myself, what is the narrative, right? And that most certainly will look different for different people. And I think that a lot of times when we look at what the narratives are around who we are, I look at myself and identify that those narratives that I hear and that people tend to espouse, that has never been my narrative,
Sure.
right? That I don't know and I don't engage with in people who may look like what those narratives are. So I think that what we have to do is we have to provide the counter narrative, right? That because sometimes those narratives believe that most of us are incarcerated than they are in school, that we are absent from our families, and all of the negative things that we know are problematic in our community as they are in many communities, but we can't let those things define us. And so what are those counter narratives? How do we highlight the positive things that we are doing and that we are impacting in our own communities? But we also have to have real conversations as a family that we have to begin to, as we identify these things as men, hold each other accountable to those things, right? So if we see these things are happening around us, and we teach bystander training where we want people to get involved. If you see something that is happening that is negatively impacting someone else, how do you, in a very safe way, address some of those things? And a lot of times we may do it in silence, right? And that silence may be misinterpreted as agreement, and then we begin to overgeneralize that these things are indicative of who we are in its entirety as Black men. And so what I always say is that I know how many Black men, I can't name how many Black men that I know personally with PhDs who are doing great things, who are doctors and lawyers and engineers, doing great family men and doing all these wonderful things. And so how do we capture those stories? How do those become just as legitimate parts of our narrative than the things that are like to perpetuate? So I always like to tell my students this is that, think about who's telling your story and what their motivation in painting you differently, right? And that if you think about all snakes, right? Not every snake is poisonous, but when you see a snake, whether the garden snake or a python, people are equally as fearful. So how is it that we are constructing these images around Black men that evoke so much fear, whether they are the python or whether they are the king cobra or a garden snake, right? And so we have to begin to deconstruct some of this stuff and say, why is it that we are painting these pictures in the way that we are? So that is intentional. So we have to make sure that not that we are proving them wrong, that we are living in our own truth. And then what I am as a Black man and what you are as a Black man, that those students and young people get to see those as equally valid identities in our community. That in order to get success, it doesn't have to be through sports, and it doesn't have to be through music, and it doesn't have to be through some of the negative things that we see in our trapping and all this other stuff. Like that's a part of it, but that's not who we are. And really, if you think about it, it's a small part of who we are, and we have to believe that. But more importantly, we have to begin to show the world that that's not who we are as Black men.
Man, what you have said needs to be on a major speaker to remind us and remind the world that Black men out here are doing great work. As you mentioned,
Right.
going back from what you said, based on the narrative, and everyone experiences differently. But as you shared, you have seen many Black men who have PhDs, who are doing great things, who are being that family person, being there for their family and stuff like that. You have seen it, but the world sometimes don't see it. And also what you have mentioned that I believe is important when it comes to us moving forward and the change that we want to see, as you mentioned, is to hold each other accountable. I think that is important. We know what the world may say about us, but we have to make sure, as you mentioned, to deconstruct some of those false narrative, and to deconstruct or to make sure we are painting the picture that we want. We also have to, in the process, hold each other accountable. Make sure we're not contributing to the false narrative. Make sure we are not painting the picture to give the world what they already been conceived from what was socially constructed about us. So it's important that we play our part in the process of the change and know that no one is going to tell the most positive stories about us. We have to take control of the stories that we want the world to know about us. And as you shared with Black men with PhDs, I remember when I was just about to start my journey, I was shocked, to be honest with you, the amount of Black men with PhDs, because I don't see it. Not until you start searching for it, then you come across Black men with PhDs. So that's one of the things that we have to make sure we are telling those stories. We are highlighting those stories, the stories that will inspire and empower the next generation, to let them know that, man, there are so many options out there. As you mentioned, that they don't have to be athletes, and nothing is wrong with being an athlete. Nothing is wrong with being an entertainer. But when you, especially as an athlete, professional athletes, the percentage of getting into that space is so small, where it's easier to become a doctor or a lawyer or an educator. So if you have a dream to do something with your life, those are options. And we have to make sure not only tell them, but also let them see other Black men, especially in those spaces, who are doing great in their lives and stuff like that. So I really appreciate you sharing that perspective. And it's a great reminder to all of us on the journey how important it is to make sure we take control of the narrative. And that leads me to my next question. What or who has influenced or inspired you to pursue the path that you're on? I know you mentioned that you are in education for over 20 years, 27 years. And who inspired you or influenced you to pursue the path that you're on?
I've been fortunate, really. I've been fortunate when you hear the proverb that it takes a village. I've had a great village in my life, and my parents, my grandparents, and I've had mentors who really poured into me. And so I was fortunate in that regard, where I've had a lot. I could sit at the feet of a lot of people who really instructed me, who really corrected me when I was wrong, who really guided me. And I think that that is very important to always understand. One of the things that I think about as a very young teenager and even as a young man, I used to love sitting and speaking with my grandfather. And a lot of times, people's lived experiences, when you read about them, but during the times that he grew up and the world was a much different place through laws, through Jim Crow and through other things, and hearing the him talk about his experience in the same spaces that I was now operating in, places that we go now, that I went, that he talked about when he was younger, what those spaces were like. That had a profound impact on me, right? And just the sacrifices that they made in order for me to have the opportunities that I had. And so I'm fortunate in that regard, that there have been a lot of people that have poured into me, and I think that has really instilled my commitment to doing that for other people, right? And that making sure that it's my way of paying it forward, because to whom much is given, much is required, and that is what kind of I really believe that. I believe in service to others. I believe in ensuring that I can do everything that I was doing as I was given it. How do I not keep it for myself, but I can share it with the people around me, because that is very, very important, right? So I kind of a long answer to that, but I am blessed in that regard, that I've had a good village.
Man, and thanks for sharing that, because that's one of the things you hear, especially those who have been in service of others for a while. I think maybe there's a little bit of shift today in which they talk more about getting back to the village, especially for the young people today,
Mm-hmm.
how important the village is to get the young people on the path that will help them to become, the best version or become great citizens. So you sharing having a village in your younger years before you get onto the path, which kind of helped to guide you along the way. I think, like in today's generation, having the village is important. But one thing that you share that I really like, and I believe that when we get an opportunity to make something of ourselves, then we have a responsibility to help others. As you mentioned, to whom much is given, much is required. So once we are on the journey to do something with ourselves because of what other people have done for us, now we
Mm-hmm.
have a responsibility to help someone else
Right.
to become who they can become. Because once we do that, a cycle keeps going where someone may be able to get out of their situation because we encountered that person. And I
Right.
think that is important, especially us as men, knowing that not all of the young people, especially our young men, are coming from an environment that mold them in the right way. And if they do come from that environment, because there are so many distractions, we have to see how we can play a role in helping them to find out what's possible. Because they may be
Right.
in an environment where they may want to become an educator. They don't have no one there who is an educator.
Right.
So talking to someone who have the experience, who can help them and guide them, I think that is really important. But go back to what you've said, to whom much is given, much is required. And if we operate with that mindset, we can create a lot of change as we go forward, because what we're doing is not just about us, but what we can contribute to make a difference in the lives of people. And I
Right.
think that
And
is
I'll
important.
just add something quickly to that, is that is what I call the difference between having role models versus real models, right? How do you become a real model in someone's life, right? Where they can see you, they can interact with you, you can seek them. There are a lot of times we can have aspirationally people who we look up to and say, I want that. But I think in our own communities, we need to be real models to young people, and particularly as you engage in. I taught sixth and seventh grade science, right? And one of the things that I approach that, is particularly as a Black male, is just that a lot of times that through our formal education, we are told what we can't do and that we're not smart enough. And what I wanted to show as a Black male science teacher is that these things are attainable to you. You can learn this. This is not something that you have to shy away from for whatever reason you've been told what you can and cannot do. You have an opportunity here to be affirmed that you can do this. And we have to create spaces around that type of thinking, and particularly with our young people all the time. We have to believe that they can do whatever they want to do. And sometimes it's our job is to help them clarify things, right? They have so much that we didn't have with pulling at their attention and their time with social media and all of these other things. So sometimes we have to be a quiet in all the noise for them to help them focus and have some intentionality about this is what I want to do. And now how can I help you get there? How can I match what you want to do and where you want to go with the opportunities to help you get there? I think that sometimes we miss that opportunity, that every one of us has an opportunity to be a real model for somebody in our community.
And I really appreciate that. And that's important. So it's not just somebody that they can look at from somewhere else, but having that real person who demonstrate the qualities that they can talk to help them. And yes, we know that there are so many distractions, and to help them to navigate their way despite the distractions, I think that is really helpful to the young people so they can realize what's possible for them. And sometimes, we just have to help them, as you mentioned, to realize what is possible. And that leads me to my next question, which kind of tie into what you just shared about being a real model for the young people. But what is your perspective on the current climate of Black men in society today?
Yeah. And again, I know that there are some things that we have to address, but I tend to look at it as that sometimes we have to get away from some of the things that are being told by us and really tap into the things that are happening within our communities that are positive, things that we are doing, as I indicated, that I know personally great Black fathers and professionals and organizers and community leaders and all of the positive things that we're doing. How do we ensure that we're telling those stories? And so I think that the climate is one that has always existed about us, right? That we've been very protective of our communities. We've been very diligent in the fight towards equality. And yes, that there are some who may not necessarily have that as a goal. But again, I contend that that's not all of us. And so I think that when we think about the climate of who we are, it really is based around the climate of who we were, and that there isn't a departure against that. And I think that's very important to understand, because I think a lot of times that we're fighting these things that are socially constructed to be that way in the first place. So how do we begin to lend our efforts to deconstructing some of those things so that we can really tell a more balanced narrative about the things that exist in every community? It's like where you hear, this idea about Black on Black crime. Well, that is part of the story, but another part of the story is, crimes happen to people around proximity. And if you redline and you put people geographically in one area and you limit resources, and people now begin to fight each other for those limited resources. Now, it doesn't excuse that, right? But I think that if you tell one part of the story without equally sharing the constructs that made those conditions exist, you're being very disingenuous about your concern for whatever that issue is. And so I think that we have to begin to not only look at the what we see as the wounds and the symptoms, we have to look at what's causing those things as well. And I believe wholeheartedly in telling a more complete story. Now, does that abdicate us from the responsibility of fixing those things? Absolutely not. But we have to address those things. But one sometimes would weaponize those things against who we are because it shapes a particular narrative of us in this country. But that there are things, the condition of some of us, it was designed to be that way, right? And there's nothing wrong with saying that, and there's nothing wrong with recognizing that. And the more important question is now, how do we fix it? How do we fix it? That becomes the most important question, I think, of not just what exists, but how can we begin to address what some of these things that we are experiencing in our communities are.
And well said, Well said, well said, especially on the perspective of the current climate and how we address what's happening. And I like how you answer that question because, a lot of times we look on the cause, we not the cause, we look on the effect.
Right,
And we look on the effect and see these are the things happening and not understanding the underlying issue, the cause that makes the things that we see happening.
right,
And I like the analogy you use with black on black crime. A lot of people do talk about black and black crime, but they don't talk about the cause for black and black crime. How do we change it? And if we're going to change something, we need to understand what may be the cause for what we want to change. Because coming up with solutions to change it may not address the cause of what we want to change. And if we're not
right,
addressing the cause for the change that we want, then, it's just going to fester up in another part of that same space that we're trying to create a change because we haven't addressed the cause. So I really appreciate that perspective. And, it's something that we have to understand because we know from a social construct standpoint, there are certain things that we're dealing with that have passed down through generations that we are still dealing with
right,
today. And to address some of those things, we have to, figure out how will we address the cause of what we're dealing with more than just looking at the cause and thinking that we are doing these things because we want to do them and not understanding
right,
because, as you mentioned, we have limited resources. Not to say those are excuses, but we
mhm,
have to talk about the reasons why we are dealing with some of the issues that we're dealing with, despite having success. We still have things that we have to change, and it's important that we address the underlying factor
right.
for some of.
I'm sorry. These are not revolutionary ideas. I mean,
Correct.
we know that crime is highly correlated to lack of education and inadequate housing and unemployment. And so I think that if we begin to improve environmental factors and community factors that are driving crime, then we see crime goes down. And it's just hard for us people to wrap their mind around that those are the drivers of crime. And so a lot of times we think that the solution is more police and as a family of law enforcement officers, my best friend, my dad was military police, my uncles were part of the police department. I understand the importance of police in helping keeping communities safe. But sometimes the answer is not to over police these communities or to add more. It is to utilize the police in our communities in an appropriate way, but also to look at those other things within our community that help drive down crime. So people who are more educated, people who have better housing, people who have access to jobs, all of those things, people who have access to quality health care, all of those things show that they are important factors to help drive down crime. So we treat the crime within itself as this island that we must tackle without thinking about the things that feeding it. And that's what I'm saying is that these are more nuanced, broader conversations that we need to have around these issues in our community. And sometimes that they are not being held, those conversations are not being had in that manner. So we begin to talk about these things without looking at the systems that feed them. And I think that once we begin to have more comprehensive conversations around these issues, we'll begin to see a bigger impact that we can have on them.
I really appreciate that perspective. I truly do appreciate it because we look at the environmental factors that contributes to, as you mentioned, we need to have deeper conversations to create the change that we want in our communities. But to understand what are the factors that cause some of the issues that we are currently dealing with, I think that is important if we're going to see the change that we want to see. We have to address those factors that contributes to what we're experiencing. And that leads me to my next question. What change do you want to see in general amongst Black men?
No, that's a tough one. I think that there's an area, and I'm a proponent of mental health, and I think that a change is to really change the narrative around Black men expressing vulnerability. A lot of times within our community, being vulnerable or presenting as vulnerable is conflated with being weak. And I think that is nothing wrong with getting help, and that I know firsthand as a Black man, as I'm sure you do as well, is that a lot of times that there are a lot of pressures on you, and sometimes you don't know what to do with all of that, right? And I think that we have to normalize, using that term, that it's okay to get help. It's okay for us to understand that we don't see a path forward, and that we need help and help figuring some things out as well. And that is not a sign of weakness, and that is not a sign or an assault against anyone's manhood when we find ourselves in those spaces. And I think that when we allow Black men more to make the mistakes, right? That to kind of show up and not be completely together, right? When we let them know that it's okay to be the work in progress, that we can begin to have deeper and more meaningful relationships, both within ourselves as Black men, within our families, within our connections to our partners, as fathers. All of those things I think is important that we allow Black men that space to kind of be sometimes just figure it out, that we don't have to have it all together. And the pressure that we put on ourselves around that sometimes aid and add to some of the frustrations that we experience within our community.
That is true. We grew up in an environment where we got to be strong, and asking for help have been really challenging for a lot of us as Black men. And that's one of the things that we hear over and over and over, how if you ask for help, how you're perceived. Since I started doing this, having these conversations, that has been one of the areas that is somewhat troubling for Black men in talking about the challenges, asking for help, because society have already painted that picture. If you ask for help, you're not strong enough. And I think that has been like a burden on Black men over the years, because if we don't talk about the challenges, then it may cause us to act out in a different way that is not really beneficial to us. Because if you internalize all the challenges, it may come out in anger. It may come
Right,
out
right,
in neglect.
right,
It may come out in not showing up. And some people, it leads to depression, and depression leads to suicide and stuff like
right,
that. So it's a topic that we really have to address. And for us as Black men to realize that, as you mentioned, asking for help is not necessarily, it's not a sign of weakness.
right,
We have to realize that everyone goes through challenges, and that we don't have to walk around with the world on our shoulders when
right.
there are other people close to us who can help. And I remember having a conversation with here on the Black Male Impact, where one of the guests shared that someone that's close to him, and this person is in mental health, and the
Mm-hmm,
person ended up committing suicide, never talk about the
mm-hmm,
challenges. So even though they have people close to them that they could talk to, they still didn't talk about the challenges that they were dealing with.
right,
And so we have to get to a point where it becomes easier to talk about the challenges, the struggles, because everyone goes through it at times. But to have people that we
right.
can trust, I think it will help us as Black men, especially to navigate our journey. And I can tell you, first, when I heard that more Black men commit suicide, I was shocked. Or
Mm-hmm,
more men on a whole
right.
commit suicide. I was like shocked. How is this be? But again, it goes back to not expressing the challenges that as men we sometimes go through.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that is one thing that we have to really give some attention to. All right, but that leads me to this next question. It's almost
Mhm.
kind of shifting gear a bit,
Okay.
but what was a pivotal moment in your life?
I've had many pivotal moments. Thankfully, most certainly meeting the person I get to share this journey with, my wife and my daughter, and things that they have done to add value to my life in ways that are unimaginable. But I think, after reflecting on this particular question, a pivotal moment in my life happened very recently in 2020, and we were in the pandemic, and I lost both parents that year in 2020.
Sorry
My
to hear that.
dad, thank you. My dad passed away in January, and then my mom passed away that same September. And one of the things about that is, one, I did not realize how that impacted me, and doing the male thing is that things in life happen and you just have to get over them and keep moving forward. But it was manifesting itself in me in ways that I was not recognizing, but the people who knew me they were recognizing, right? And so working through that, and remembering that it's okay to experience what you experience in that moment, and to recognize that, and there isn't this rush to get over it. And so that taught me some lessons that I don't think that I got up until that point, about the value of life, the value of really expressing how you feel about people, not taking things for granted, that you don't get a do-over, that there's such a finality about that you come to realize that's it, right? And so how do you make sure that you approach life every day, giving it everything that you have, when you leave nothing on the table, right? And that you don't leave things for others to do. You don't leave things for others to say. That I think the greatest tragedy is to leave this world, and the work that you were called to do goes unfinished, or not started at all. And I think that created a different sense of purpose for me in this life, and what I want my legacy to be, and what I want the impact to be for me. And so for me, it was a restart. I had an opportunity to press restart, and so that was very pivotal for me, of just really thinking about that, because it was the unimaginable. Could not, in a million years, I wouldn't have thought that it would have happened. But yet here I was in the middle of it, and it definitely shaped me and reshaped me in a way that I think was for the better.
Thanks for sharing your story and your experience. And losing parents can be hard for people. You hear those stories all the time. And as you shared in a moment, you realize the importance of life, and how sometimes going through challenging situations, as men, we are told to just brush it off and just continue. And if we don't have the right people around us to give us perspective and to help us see how our lives have changed, it can have a more severe impact on us. And but just listening to you sharing the experience, I also realized that you were also open to the to be receptive of what other people were sharing with you about you and how you changed. And I think as men, we have to also pay attention to the people that care about us and what they're sharing when we start to act differently, especially dealing with, especially losing parents. It doesn't matter what age you are, that's your parent. So once we are open to and to be receptive to people who see changes, I think sometimes we will navigate through the tough times a little bit better, because we're not going to see everything that we're doing, because some things may seem natural when it's unnatural based on what we're dealing with as we go forward. So I really appreciate you sharing that experience and how you get to overcome it, but also in those moments, as you mentioned, that it gives us an opportunity to tap into part of us that we may not aware of before the experience,
Right.
and also to live each day to the fullest, because each
Absolutely.
day is an opportunity that we may not see again. And that's a great reminder to all of us that we need to give the world the best of us each time, each day, as much as
Yep.
possible as we go forward.
Absolutely. I tell my students every day. It was like one of the things that they'll tell you. That I tell students that when you show up with your best self, the best version of yourself. And I think that that is very important that we do that. If I can't show up to something with my best self, then I won't show up, because I think that we owe others, we owe it to ourselves, that people always get to experience and we always get to present the best of who we are. And that's important.
Man, that's a great reminder. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, that is important. Show up with your best self every day. So who the person or people experiencing is the best of yourself. And so that's a great reminder for all of us. My next question is, what life lesson have you learned late in life that you believe is important and can benefit this current generation?
Right. You've heard the saying that don't sweat the small stuff. But I think the life lesson that I've heard, I've always tried to remember that, don't sweat the small stuff. But what I've learned in the life lesson is that it's all small stuff, right?
Right.
And that how do we make sure that we are really, not investing too much into these things that kind of can derail us, and that life truly is about your perspective, and not what happens to you, but how you can how you respond to it. In the poem Attitude, when it says that life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you respond to it.
Yeah.
And what I found as I've gotten older is that is true. And and when things come in your life, it is really thinking about, how do you adjust? How can you pivot? How can you now do what you need to do to face those things, right? And even in this interview, the test, as I told you, that I'm in Brooklyn, and so you hear the horn
Yeah.
behind me, right? And those are the things that all day you may not hear this, and now when you doing what you want to do, this may be something that maybe appear to be an inconvenient reality. But you know what, you have to begin to understand that, okay, it's not what happens to me, but how I'm going to adjust and how I'm going to respond to those things. And I think that those are the lessons that, we talk about this and developing grit and developing resilience, and really that's in essence what I'm talking about. And that it's not what happens, but how do we respond appropriately to what happens to us. And I think that that is a lesson, a life lesson, that I think that has worked well for me. And many people say, I've never seen you upset. And I tend to say, well, what reason do you have to get upset? Doesn't mean that things don't frustrate me.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that things don't, they are not trying things that come in my life. But at the end of the day, I can respond to how, I can choose how I respond to those things. And I choose to respond to them in more constructive ways, right? Because I think that the way that we respond, I would just say that you start with the end in mind, in the Stephen Covey principle. And the end in mind for me is that whatever happens to me, how do I emerge from it better, with relationships being better, with connections being stronger, and let that guide you how I interact and how I present. Because when you fly off the handle, you do things, you say things that you don't necessarily mean, but in that moment, that's where your emotions were. And then you do irreparable damage to relationships and to things. And so I'm always conscious of that, to make sure that I can have some control over not what happens to me, but how I respond to what happened. And obviously that comes from a strong connection to my faith, a strong connection to my community, pay attention to the me that is reflected back to me by the people that I care most about, to hear those voices and that feedback, that all of that becomes an important part of that.
Man, thanks for sharing. Uh, just listening to you, sometimes, I just get caught up in the response and how important it is, as you mentioned, the life lesson is how we respond to life, how we
Right.
respond to the situations that we experience. And just listening to what you're saying, because things are going to happen that we have no
Yeah,
control over. And how we
absolutely.
respond to those things is important. We have to be mindful of how we're responding to life situations. So that's a great reminder especially to the younger generation today, and to all of us, because things are going to happen that we cannot control. And we have to be mindful of how we respond and, respond in a more favorable way, not just because it's going to benefit us, but also that we are thinking about the people around us when we respond to life situations, especially those we don't have control over. And that leads me to my next question. Where can the listeners find you and help support your work to make a difference?
I'm sorry, I muted because of the horn, but I'm at Medgar Evers College. I'm here in Crown Heights section of Brooklyn. It's an incredible institution with an incredible mission. And I talked about it earlier in my opening statements that this institution was named after Medgar Wally Evers. And we know that one of the icons of the civil rights movement gave his life literally to help the people of Mississippi get the right to vote, right? And this institution was born out of community in that they were advocating for a 4-year institution existing in this community for the people of this community. So it was advocacy to the state and to the City University of New York to establish a college in this community. And so that's why I feel so honored to work here. And I've worked at several institutions, but one not quite like what this institution is and this mission. And so as I shared with you before about this idea of social justice, that's where that comes from. And not just giving students to a good education, but really, as you said in your comments, is that connecting them to how they can begin to make a difference, how they can use what they're gaining here, not for themselves, but for others, right? How they can help resolve some of the things that we're talking about today. What can you do now to take your talents, take your skills, and that your degree is not just about changing your life, but changing the lives of those around you as well?
Oh, man, and I thank you for sharing that, just the experience that you are having at the institution, and just to let the people know how important it is, where you are, and the reason why you love that space. But listening to you sharing about the social justice space gave me a lot of perspective. But I will definitely put in the description, where they can find you and support the work, especially preparing the young people or the next generation to be an integral part in the process of making a difference. I think empowering the next generation is how we're going to see the change that we need to see. Because it's not just to tell them or educate them on what they need to do a job, but how they can participate in the process of creating positive change. So I really love the mission and just what the school itself stands for, because I think that's how we create change. Not education is important and powerful, but the social aspect of the process of educating our students, I think it is critically important when we're talking about change, especially to move from where we are to where we want to be. So I appreciate you sharing that piece. So my final question is, what impact do you want to have on the world?
I think the impact is that I've made a difference. I believe in, the quote is that, a measure of a man's life is not what he does for himself, but really what he does for others. I do believe that, right? And that at the end of the day, that someone and that I feel that I've been able to make a difference and that I've given it my all towards a cause or something that really is rooted in service to others. And I think that is what that I want my legacy to be, what I want my mark to be, that how can I help someone else? And I think that by doing what I do, working in higher education, working with young people as they are pursuing their dreams, that how can I be in a very small way a part of that journey for them? How can I help them overcome obstacles that they may see as insurmountable, but it was like getting them to shift their thinking and their perspectives about that and understand that when you encounter obstacles in your life, that they can be either a stumbling block or a stepping stone. And right, but it's your perspective on that. And so how do you use those things as a stepping stone to help you get to where you want to be. So it really is reminding them that no matter what, to keep going and to keep going and to keep going, and that they owe it to themselves, they owe it to their communities, they owe it to the people coming behind them to continue on their journey. Because if they can make it through, they make it that much easier for those coming behind them.
That's important. And just listening to you, I can sense the passion and commitment to doing the work to make a difference. And as you mentioned about your legacy, just listening to you, you can hear it, your passion. And I think it's important because once our work becomes a part of us, it then becomes easier to convey it in what is said, what is shared. And I think just listening to you, I can sense that commitment to making a difference, especially into the lives of the next generation. As you get to experience, and through your experience, you empower the next generation. Man, it's just great just listening to you and what you have to share and how we can make a difference. So it's a pleasure having you here on the Black Male Impact.
Well, I appreciate it. And I truly believe that if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. So I do appreciate an opportunity to share just a bit about myself and really, again, to thank you for this platform to really get these stories out and to really connect with people and connect with a community of people who are really out there impacting their community and you yourself included. I think that that's important. So thank you. And I celebrate you and the work that you're doing as well.
Thank you. I truly appreciate that. And listeners, as always, the goal is to bring guests that we believe will share knowledge and insights and perspective that can benefit all of us as we continue on this journey to make a difference. As you know, the goal for us here at the Black Male Impact is where positive changes are inspired. Our goal is to inspire you and to empower you to be the best that you can be. And please, as we continue, give your support so we can continue to do the work that makes a difference. Thanks for being here with us on the Black Male Impact.